The cult of the crypto coin. The Mojave sun had long set behind the rusted chain-link fence that protected the compound, leaving only the faintest glow of twilight over the barren landscape. A warm, persistent wind kicked up sand along the perimeter. Beyond the fence, nothing but scrub brush and distant rock outcroppings. No sign of civilization for miles. That was precisely how the cult wanted it. They called themselves the Church of the Sovereign Key, a secretive order that had sprung up not out of old-time religious fervor, but from an unholy fusion of digital esoterica and apocalyptic prophecy. They occupied a few prefabricated structures and a central dome-like tent erected upon a concrete slab. At one time, the place had been a solar research station, its photovoltaic arrays still scattered about as broken glass and twisted metal. Now, repurposed cables and fiber optic lines snaked into the dome, connecting a makeshift data center to satellite uplinks, cooling units, and something else entirely. A next-generation quantum computer humming softly in a sealed chamber beneath the ground. In that circular hall, lit only by LED strips and the flicker of monitors, Brother Lazarus presided. He was a lean man with a shock of prematurely grey hair, a measured voice, and cold eyes that never seemed to blink enough. He stood behind a lectern of salvaged steel, a battered Bible in hand. He wore a robe of dark blue fabric, onto which small circuit board patterns had been embroidered in gold thread. Before him, 24 cult members knelt. They wore simple desert tan jumpsuits, and each had a small barcode-like tattoo along the inside of their left wrist. They were listening intently, rapt, as Lazarus chanted verses from the Book of Revelation. He causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, Lazarus intoned, his voice echoing softly off the dome's metallic interior. His eyes scanned the crowd. And that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark. He closed the book slowly. We are watching these prophecies come alive through the blockchain, through the currency that defies the nation-state. It is the sign and seal of global governance. Bitcoin and its kin, Ethereum, Monero, Polkadot. These instruments are beyond borders, and thus they herald the end of the dollar, the pound, the yen, and the euro. They will usher in a new order where human sovereignty is diminished. We must not let these digital idols replace God's plan. We must intercept them. Rachel knelt in the back row, her knees sore against the dusty floor, listening intently. She'd arrived at the compound only a few weeks prior, drawn by whispers on a dark web forum dedicated to new Christianities. She was a skilled programmer and cryptographer, though she'd never have guessed she'd end up in a place like this. Her early adult years had been spent at a fintech company, writing code for payment gateways. But a crisis of faith and the allure of something bigger, something meaningful, had drawn her here. She thought they were going to build a safe haven, a community in the desert. Instead, she'd found a secretive cult obsessed with hoarding cryptocurrency. Still, Rachel had to admit they weren't Luddites. They were highly advanced. The rumor was that their quantum computer, a device engineered with photonic qubits and topological error-correcting codes, could break the elliptic curve cryptography securing Bitcoin wallets. This would mean they could siphon off huge amounts of cryptocurrency from unsuspecting owners, all while leaving no trace. Lazarus wanted the coins for the community, or so he said. He claimed they would store this stolen crypto offline, safe from the eventual beast system that would enslave the world. But Rachel harbored doubts. Something in Lazarus's eyes told her he cared more about personal gain than prophecy. He delighted too much in the complexity of the hacks, the subtlety of the thefts. She wondered if he was using his flock merely as tools in some grand get-rich-quick scheme. The more she observed, the more plausible that became. That night, after the sermon ended and most of the cultists drifted off to their cots, Lazarus summoned his two closest lieutenants, Ezekiel and Naomi, down into the sub-basement where the quantum core was kept. The whir of refrigeration units and the hum of fiber cables resonated in the concrete corridors. Cold, filtered air blew from vents high on the walls to keep the delicate processors stable. Ezekiel was tall, broad-shouldered, a former Marine who had found Lazarus's apocalyptic visions convincing after his discharge. Naomi was a brilliant systems architect from Singapore. No one knew quite how she got here, but her skill at optimizing the quantum algorithms was unrivaled. The two of them flanked Lazarus as he entered the chamber. The quantum computer was housed in a cylindrical shell, covered in superconducting coils and shielded cryostats. Green and amber indicator lights blinked softly, and the display screens above scrolled through diagnostic information. "Naomi," Lazarus said quietly, "is the algorithm stable enough now to execute Shaw's protocol against the ECDSA keys for the wallets on our target list?" Naomi nodded. "We've tested it on smaller curves. The full Bitcoin elliptic curve digital signature algorithm keys are still challenging, but I believe we can handle them. We'll need to run multiple attempts to ensure we find the private keys. The system can factor large numbers at unprecedented speed. Give me another 3 days for final calibrations." "And after we seize their private keys," Ezekiel asked, "what stops them from noticing?" "They might notice eventually," said Lazarus, "but Bitcoin transactions are pseudonymous. We'll route everything through a series of intermediary addresses before consolidating into our cold storage wallets. Wallets we won't touch for years. By the time anyone investigates the breaches, they will be irrecoverable. Besides," he added, picking up a small slip of paper from a metal desk, "the world will have bigger problems. Currencies will falter. Governments will panic. We're only a few steps ahead of the storm." He closed his eyes, placing a hand on the cooling unit's metal frame. Revelation 18:11-12 says, "And the merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over her, for no man buyeth their merchandise any more." We stand at the cusp of that moment. Let us gather what we can before Babylon falls. Over the next few nights, Rachel worked quietly at a terminal in the main data room, combing through logs. She'd gained some trust in the compound due to her technical skill. Lazarus had assigned her and a small team to maintain the network infrastructure. While others prayed, sang hymns, or listened to Lazarus's impassioned reading of scripture, Rachel found herself crawling through code. One evening, as static crackled in her earpiece, a communication device assigned to all technical staff, she overheard fragments of a conversation between Naomi and Lazarus on a secure channel. Rachel had no clearance for it, but a subtle flaw in the firewall routing allowed her partial access. Naomi's voice: "We can directly target known whale accounts. Large amounts of Bitcoin sitting in cold storage protected by standard cryptography. The quantum rig can handle them." Lazarus's voice: "Excellent. Start with the big one from that exchange hack victim. You have the public key. Extract their private key, drain their account." Rachel's heart pounded. Draining a whale account could net them tens of millions in BTC. This wasn't about preventing some global apocalypse. This was large-scale theft. She knew Lazarus preached that by hoarding the crypto into the church's coffers, they were preventing others from using it as a stepping stone to global domination. But what if Lazarus was simply enriching himself, planning to vanish into the night once the vaults were full? She had to talk to someone, maybe Naomi, but Naomi seemed too close to Lazarus. Ezekiel, he was loyal and drank up the sermons like water. Maybe Xander, the young systems admin from Germany who'd expressed doubts. Yes, Xander, he might listen. When the next day's heat rolled over the desert, Rachel cornered Xander in the storage tent, where he was reorganizing spare cables. "Xander," she said, keeping her voice low, "I need to talk to you about Lazarus." Xander looked around nervously. "What is it?" "I think he's lying. He's going to hack into major Bitcoin accounts using the quantum system. He's talking about whales, private keys, huge theft. This isn't about stopping the New World Order. It's about stealing massive amounts of wealth." Xander's brow furrowed. "You're sure?" "I overheard them," said Rachel. "He's planning something big. I think we're just pawns in his game." Xander sighed. "I had a feeling. But what can we do? Everyone here believes him. Ezekiel would kill us if he thought we were betraying Lazarus. Naomi controls the system's guts. We can't just leave either. Lazarus keeps guards, and we're miles from nowhere." Rachel nodded. "We need proof, real proof. If we can record Lazarus admitting this is all for personal gain, maybe we can convince others or at least blow the whistle somehow." Xander looked skeptical. "We have no signal out here except through their controlled satellite uplink. If we try to send a message, they'll see it. Rachel took a deep breath. I'm going to try and get into the secure archives. I'll find their transaction logs, chat logs, anything. Maybe we can smuggle it out on a data drive and escape at night. Xander gave a grim nod. Careful, Rachel. That evening, Lazarus held another sermon. He described the mark of the beast in lurid detail, insisting that digital currencies were only a gateway to forcing every human to transacting with invisible marks, scannable microchips, and biometrically locked payment channels. He quoted Revelation 13:17 again and again, that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark. His voice rose, echoing off the dome. The blockchain is the spine of the beast, my children. We must take its backbone and break it, or at least hoard its wealth, so that when the beast arises, it cannot pay its armies. Some of the cult members nodded, eyes wide and trusting. Rachel wondered if any of them understood the technology at all, or if they just followed out of fear and desperation. The world outside was turbulent, rising inflation, currency wars, rumors of central bank digital currencies that might replace paper money altogether. Perhaps Lazarus's narrative seemed plausible to them. After the sermon, while the others drifted off, Rachel slipped into the network room. The space was cramped, lined with switchgear and server racks. LED indicators flickered in the darkness like ghostly fireflies. She sat at a terminal and entered an administrative shell, taking advantage of a misconfigured permission set Naomi had overlooked. The logs were vast. She sorted by keyword, whale, private key, Shaw's algorithm. A torrent of results appeared, logged command lines, incoming target lists, addresses identified as high-value Bitcoin accounts. She opened one file after another, heart pounding. There were plain text notes referring to final extractions and instructions for consolidation of stolen funds into Lazarus' personal holdings do not reveal to congregation. This was it, black and white evidence. Then she spotted a name. Lazarus had created multiple external wallet addresses that were not in the cult's supposed offline community vault. Instead, these were tied to a secret second ledger Naomi maintained. The notes indicated Lazarus planned to move the stolen assets to hardware wallets he would keep on his person. In other words, he planned to disappear. Rachel quickly copied these files to a small encrypted USB drive hidden in her jumpsuit pocket. She erased the terminal's recent history and slipped out. Outside, the desert night stretched infinitely. Standing on the edge of the compound's fence, Rachel looked up at the clear sky, studded with stars. She had to escape, get the evidence to the authorities. She couldn't just walk out, though. The nearest town was a 2-hour drive away, and they had no cars except for Lazarus's armored SUV and a few dirt bikes that were locked up tight. Suddenly, footsteps behind her. She turned to see Ezekiel looming. The big man frowned. "What are you doing out here?" "Just getting some air," she said. Her voice sounded too high in her own ears. Ezekiel didn't move. "Lazarus asked me to keep an eye on you. You've been acting distant." Rachel forced a smile. "I'm meditating on his words, that's all." She touched her wrist where the barcode tattoo was, a symbolic gesture of submission. Ezekiel nodded slowly and walked away, but Rachel knew now she was on borrowed time. Over the next 2 days, the cult began their first major hack. Naomi triggered the quantum computer's Shaw's algorithm routine to derive private keys from targeted public keys. The computer's core hummed with an unusual intensity. Rachel, assigned to network monitoring, watched the data scroll by on her screen, complex mathematical operations, factorization routines tearing through the cryptographic structures that had once been deemed secure. Naomi, pacing behind Lazarus, read the output. "We've got it. The private keys to one whale account, approximately 2,500 BTC inside, unmoved for years. That's nearly $100 million at current exchange rates." "Transfer it," Lazarus commanded. "Then wipe any trace of the operation from our logs. Move the BTC through a chain of mixers and then into the designated holding addresses. Our community will be safe when the beast arises." Rachel nearly laughed at the audacity. How could these people not see what he was doing? But the cultists around Lazarus nodded reverently. They thought they were saving the world, or at least saving themselves. As Naomi typed the commands, Ezekiel leaned in, whispering to Lazarus, "The congregation waits for your instructions. Shall I tell them the deed is done?" Lazarus shook his head. "Not yet. Let them believe we are still preparing. Once I have enough in my coffers, we will reveal that we have stripped the beast of its wealth. Only then will they truly revere me as their protector." Rachel understood now. Lazarus was controlling not just the crypto but the narrative. By waiting, he could claim the hack was done later, crediting divine insight or whatever nonsense he wished to spout, ensuring the congregation would never doubt his power. That night, Rachel met with Xander behind a storage shed. She showed him the USB drive with the logs. "I have enough evidence here to put Lazarus away," she whispered. "We need to reach the outside world." "Easier said than done," Xander replied grimly. "There's constant surveillance. The fence is guarded at night. The communications uplink is encrypted and password protected. I tried guessing their credentials. No luck. Naomi changed them recently. I can't brute force it without raising alarms." Rachel frowned. "What about the old satellite dish behind the dome, the one that's disconnected?" "That relic?" Xander shook his head. "It's from the solar station days. Might be non-functional. But maybe we can patch the feed into one of our laptops and get a weak signal out. It won't last long, and they'll detect it." Rachel bit her lip. "It's worth a shot. If we send out an encrypted packet, just enough data to alert someone, maybe we can signal the authorities." Xander nodded. "We can try tonight, after midnight, when most are asleep." They parted ways. Rachel knew this was dangerous. If caught, Lazarus or Ezekiel would likely kill them, or worse. But she couldn't let this crime continue. Midnight. The dome was quiet. Most cultists slept in the barracks. A few stayed awake, praying or muttering scriptural passages. Rachel and Xander crept around the back of the main structure. They found the old dish, a cracked parabola half buried in sand and debris. Xander had brought a portable laptop and a cable he'd found in storage. He jury-rigged a connection to the dish's transmitter. Sparks from a makeshift solder job had to be muffled with cloth. Rachel plugged in the USB with the logs. She typed commands, trying to ping an outside server. The laptop's fan whirred loudly. She managed to get a faint signal, some old satellite not yet decommissioned. Perfect. She started uploading the encrypted logs to a known whistleblower drop site on the dark web, hoping someone, anyone, would pick them up. A sudden spotlight beam swept over them. Rachel froze. Had someone seen them? Ezekiel's voice rang out, "Stop!" Xander's eyes went wide. He yanked the cable. The upload was incomplete. Rachel cursed under her breath. They took off running around the dome, but Ezekiel was fast, and soon more guards joined the chase. They ran inside one of the side buildings, an old research lab now used for hydroponics. Inside, purple LED lights glowed over rows of nutrient solution tanks. The smell of wet plastic and fertilizer was sharp. They crouched behind a vat, heart pounding. Xander whispered, "They know we tried something. We have to get out now." Rachel nodded, clutching the USB in her hand. "We have to warn the others. At least some of them must be innocent." Footsteps approached. A flashlight beam pierced the darkness. Rachel held her breath. It was Naomi. She had a taser in one hand, eyes scanning the room. Naomi's voice was barely audible. "Rachel, Xander, I know you're here. Come out. We don't have to involve Lazarus. If you give me whatever you took, I can protect you." Rachel considered it. Naomi was dangerous, but seemed rational. Could she trust her? Xander shook his head vigorously, mouthing, "No." Naomi took another step. "I know about the USB drive. If Lazarus finds out you tried to leak information, he'll kill you. I can help you escape, but I need that drive." Rachel pressed her lips together. Something about Naomi's tone was off. She sounded too calm, too certain. "Why would you help us?" Rachel called softly. "Because I know Lazarus is lying," Naomi said, her voice cracking slightly. "I've known for weeks. He's going to run off with the funds, leave us all here to rot. I don't want that future. I want a share, and I want out. Give me the drive and I'll distract Ezekiel long enough for you two to flee." Rachel and Xander exchanged looks. Could this be the twist they needed? Xander nodded reluctantly. Rachel stood slowly, hands raised. Naomi approached, taser lowered. Rachel held out the USB drive. But just as Naomi extended her free hand, a shot rang out. The hydroponics lab door burst open. Lazarus strode in with a pistol, an antique Colt revolver. Ezekiel and another guard flanked him. Naomi spun around, furious. "You said you'd give me time!" Lazarus raised the gun level with Naomi's chest. "I don't negotiate with traitors." He shot her without hesitation. Naomi crumpled, eyes wide in shock. Xander cried out. Rachel froze, stepping back, clutching the USB. Lazarus advanced, pistol smoking faintly. Ezekiel and the guard blocked the door. Rachel's mind raced. Lazarus had just killed Naomi, his top quantum engineer. Did he even know how to maintain the quantum machine alone? Did he care? "Rachel," Lazarus said softly, "I know what you've done. You've doubted me, sought to betray me. But I am chosen by God to prevent the beast's kingdom. Hand me what you took." "I won't," Rachel said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. "I know what you're doing. You're stealing Bitcoin. You'll vanish. The congregation you claim to protect. You're abandoning them." Lazarus smiled sadly. "They are sheep. They know nothing of the true complexity. I'm giving them purpose in these final days. Without me, they are lost. Do you think the world out there cares about them? They need the illusion of hope." He cocked the revolver's hammer. "Give me the USB, or Xander dies first." Rachel's heart pounded. She had no weapon, no way out. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the USB drive. Lazarus extended his left hand, palm up. Just then, the compound's power flickered. The lights dimmed, and an alarm siren started wailing. Everyone froze. Ezekiel shouted, "What's happening?" Lazarus spun around, furious. "Ezekiel, go check the quantum core." He turned back to Rachel, snarling. "You tampered with something, didn't you?" Rachel shook her head, genuinely confused. The alarm was new. Had someone else intervened? Had that partial upload alerted an external party? Outside, the low rumble of engines. Bright headlights cut through the darkness. The guards at the perimeter shouted. A voice boomed over a loudspeaker. "This is the FBI! Drop your weapons and come out with your hands up!" Rachel couldn't believe her ears. The FBI? How had they found them so fast? Lazarus's eyes widened with panic. He grabbed Rachel's wrist, twisting it. She cried out and dropped the USB. He kicked it away. "Ezekiel," he screamed, "hold them off! I'll handle this!" Ezekiel sprinted out, gun drawn. Lazarus shoved Rachel aside and ran deeper into the lab, toward a back exit. Xander rushed to Rachel's side, helping her stand. The FBI's loudspeaker repeated the command. Gunfire crackled outside. "We have to get out," said Xander. Rachel limped after him, heading toward another door that led to the main data center. If the FBI was here, they might shut down the operation, save the cultists. But what if Lazarus escaped with the keys? Inside the data center, sparks flew from a damaged console. The quantum core's cooling system alarm blared. Without Naomi, the complex environment was falling apart. Qubits might decohere any moment, losing the carefully extracted keys forever. Rachel spotted Lazarus hunched over a server rack, stuffing something into a hard-shell case, likely the hardware wallets containing the stolen Bitcoin. She wanted to stop him, but she had no weapon. Xander looked around desperately, grabbing a metal pipe from under a console. They advanced on Lazarus. He turned, brandishing the revolver. "Fools!" he spat. "You know nothing. Without me, you'd never have found this place. I could have saved you from the world outside." He fired, the bullet lodging in the server rack behind them, sending sparks. Xander ducked behind a console. Outside, the sound of shouting and more gunfire. The FBI breaching the compound. They must have been tipped off by the partial upload. Even incomplete, it might have given a location hint. Or perhaps Naomi had a secret escape plan that alerted the authorities. No time to wonder. Lazarus pulled a small EMP grenade from a pouch at his waist, a device Naomi had once demonstrated to him. "If I can't have it," he said, "no one will. The beast can rot, and so can you." He activated the grenade. Rachel's eyes widened. An electromagnetic pulse would fry all electronics within range, including whatever was left of their evidence, and the quantum core might overload catastrophically. Before Lazarus could throw it, a flashbang detonated at the door. FBI agents stormed in, their rifles trained on Lazarus. He whirled, firing at them. They returned fire. Lazarus staggered, struck in the shoulder, but he hurled the EMP grenade anyway. It clinked against the floor, rolling near the quantum console. Rachel dove behind a rack, covering her ears. The EMP burst in a bright crackle of blue sparks. Instantly, screens went dark. The whir of cooling fans ceased. The quantum core's superconducting magnets lost power, and the delicate qubit states collapsed. FBI agents shouted orders, grabbing Lazarus, forcing him down. He screamed verses of revelation, delirious with pain. "For in 1 hour is thy judgment come," his voice rasped, echoing in the darkness. The agents confiscated the hardshell case from him. Its contents would be examined later, no doubt. The cult leader's dream of vanishing with the stolen fortunes was over. Rachel lay still, shaken, ears ringing. Xander helped her up. The FBI agents, shining flashlights in their faces, demanded they identify themselves. Rachel complied, explaining she was trapped here. Xander did the same. The agents hurried them outside. In the courtyard, other cult members were on their knees, hands raised, terrified and confused. They surrendered without a fight, as most of them were duped innocents who believed Lazarus's end times narrative. Ambulances waited beyond the fence. The sky was starting to show the faintest hint of dawn. Rachel looked to the east and inhaled the cool desert air. She was free. But what of the stolen Bitcoin? An FBI technician emerged from the dome. "We found the hardware wallets in Lazarus's case," he said. "But they're empty," he frowned, shaking his head. "And the servers are fried from the EMP. No records left." Empty? Rachel's mind spun. Lazarus had the private keys. He must have transferred the funds somewhere else before the raid. But if the EMP destroyed the records, where were they now? It seemed impossible he could have done so under everyone's noses. Unless... She remembered Naomi, shot dead by Lazarus. Had Naomi transferred the funds out before her death? Or had Lazarus never actually consolidated them yet, needing more time? With the quantum computer destroyed, they'd never factor those addresses again. The stolen Bitcoin might be lost forever, scattered in half-completed transactions waiting for confirmation that would never come. As the agents led Lazarus away in cuffs, he smiled through the pain. He locked eyes with Rachel and said quietly, "The beast still roams, girl. You've only delayed it. You think you've won?" He laughed, coughing. The laugh sent a chill down Rachel's spine. In the following hours, the FBI debriefed the surviving cult members. Most had no idea what Lazarus had been doing. They had believed they were saving themselves from an economic apocalypse. Some wept when they learned Lazarus's true nature. Others refused to believe it even as they watched him taken away. Xander approached Rachel, bandaged from a minor scrape. "So, what happens now?" Rachel shook her head. "I don't know. The Bitcoin Lazarus stole. Maybe gone. The quantum keys are lost. The FBI will investigate the mixers and wallets mentioned in the half-finished logs. Maybe they'll recover something, but it might be tied up in cryptographic dead ends forever." Xander gave a grim smile. "At least no one else will suffer at Lazarus's hands. We're free, and the cultists can go home." Rachel nodded. She looked around at the makeshift compound. The Mojave sun rose, illuminating twisted solar panels and half-buried cables. The dream of a new apocalypse-resistant church had crumbled in the desert dust. 3 days later, Rachel sat in a small motel room in Barstow, provided temporarily by the FBI until she could get back on her feet. She sipped coffee, flipping through news reports on her phone. The raid on the Desert Bitcoin cult, as the media called it, had made headlines. The FBI spokesperson said they had prevented a large-scale crypto theft, but details were fuzzy. The total funds recovered were minimal. Her mind returned to that empty hardware case. Lazarus had been confident, sure he would escape with fortunes. Where had he hidden the keys? She opened her email and found a strange encrypted message waiting. She recognized Naomi's old encryption signature. Naomi must have set a dead man's switch. The message read, "If you are reading this, then Lazarus tried to betray us both. I anticipated his treachery. Before he shot me, I sent the stolen BTC to an address secured behind post-quantum cryptography. No one can break it easily. Not the FBI, not Lazarus, not you. This wealth will remain locked away, inert. No one profits from this evil. Consider it a ghost of stolen dreams. N. Rachel leaned back, surprised, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. Naomi had, in her final moments, decided to deny Lazarus his ultimate reward. The millions in Bitcoin were likely held in a quantum-resistant address. Maybe a scheme Naomi had been working on, one that even Shaw's algorithm couldn't crack. In the end, everyone lost. Lazarus lost his fortune and his freedom. The cult lost their leader and their illusions. The stolen cryptocurrency was now in a limbo beyond anyone's reach, an ironic twist in a story fueled by greed, faith, and cryptographic power. Rachel closed the laptop and stared at the ceiling. The unexpected coda, the very technology Lazarus used to steal, had been turned against him. The mark of the beast he so feared would now remain unclaimed, locked in a cryptographic purgatory. Perhaps that was justice. Outside, the freeway hummed with cars and trucks. Regular people conducting everyday commerce with dollars and credit cards, oblivious to the hidden battles for digital wealth. For now, the world would go on. The beast was not defeated, nor was it crowned. The future remained uncertain, its secrets encrypted behind algorithms and human failings. As the desert wind rattled the motel's window, Rachel allowed herself a thin smile. She had survived, and now she knew the truth. Not even quantum code breaking and stolen millions could guarantee salvation from one's own corruption. In the twilight of revelations, the best one could hope for was to step back into the real world and start anew.